Parents, what's the most heartwarming thing your child has done for you? I remember the day Jake was born like it was yesterday. He was our first child, and my wife and I were over the moon. But from the very beginning, it was clear that our little boy was different. He was so small, so fragile. The doctors told us he had a weak constitution and that we would need to be extra careful with him. As Jake grew, his health issues became more pronounced. He was in and out of the hospital constantly. Fevers, infections, and other ailments seemed to plague him relentlessly. Every time we thought things were getting better, another setback would occur. It felt like we were always holding our breath, waiting for the next crisis. The medical bills piled up quickly. Our savings were drained, and we had to take out loans to cover the costs. My wife had to quit her job to care for Jake full-time, which meant we were relying solely on my income. It was a constant struggle to make ends meet. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we would get through it all. Despite all of this, Jake was an incredibly resilient child. He had a spirit that seemed to shine through even the darkest times. He loved to draw and would spend hours creating beautiful pictures of fantastical worlds and creatures. His smile could light up the room, even when he was hooked up to machines in a hospital bed. But as he grew older, he began to understand the strain his condition was putting on our family. I remember one night, when he was about 7, I found him sitting on his bed, tears streaming down his face. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm so sorry." I sat down beside him, pulling him into a hug. "What are you sorry for, buddy?" I asked, confused. "For making things so hard," he whispered. "I know we don't have much money because of me. I hear you and Mom talking sometimes. It's my fault." My heart broke in that moment. Seeing my little boy carrying such a heavy burden was almost too much to bear. "Jake," I said gently, lifting his chin so he could look into my eyes. "None of this is your fault. You're the best thing that ever happened to us. We love you more than anything in this world, and we would do anything to make sure you're okay." He sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "But you and Mom are always so worried. I don't want to make things harder for you." I hugged him tighter. "We're worried because we love you, and we want you to be healthy. Yes, things are tough sometimes, but that's not your fault. It's just the way life is. And we're going to get through it together, as a family." Over the years, this conversation would repeat itself many times. Jake would have moments of guilt and sadness, and I would do my best to reassure him. It was a cycle that became all too familiar. There were times when I felt like I was failing him, not being able to provide a more stable life for him and my wife. But I knew that giving up was not an option. We found joy in the little things. Family game nights, picnics in the park when Jake was well enough, and bedtime stories where his imagination could run wild. These moments of normalcy were precious, and they kept us going. One particularly tough winter, Jake was hospitalized for several weeks. It was around Christmas, and the hospital was decorated with festive lights and decorations. Jake was too weak to get out of bed, and he was devastated that he would miss Christmas at home. My wife and I decided to bring Christmas to him. We decorated his hospital room with a small tree, hung up lights, and even managed to sneak in some of his favorite holiday snacks. On Christmas morning, we sat by his bed, opening presents and singing carols. It wasn't the Christmas we had imagined, but it was one filled with love and hope. Jake's face lit up when he saw the effort we had made. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse but full of gratitude. "This is the best Christmas ever." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at my son. In that moment, I realized that despite all the hardships, we were incredibly lucky. Jake's teenage years marked a miraculous turning point for our family. After years of relentless health battles, his condition started to improve. It was as if a dark cloud had finally lifted, and the sun was beginning to shine through. We were overjoyed. The constant hospital visits became less frequent, and Jake's strength and vitality returned. My wife and I were ecstatic and wanted to celebrate this newfound health. However, by that time, our financial situation was dire. The medical bills had drained our savings, and we were struggling to keep up with the mortgage and other expenses. The idea of a celebration seemed like an impossible luxury. Amidst our financial woes, I began to worry about Jake's future. He was nearing the end of high school, and college was just around the corner. The thought of affording his college fees seemed like a distant dream. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, I voiced my concerns. "Jake," I said, trying to keep my tone light, "college is coming up soon. Have you thought about how we're going to manage the fees? Things are a bit tight right now." Jake, who had always been mature beyond his years, looked at me with determination in his eyes. "Dad, I've been thinking about that too. I know things are tough. I've been looking into scholarships and ways to make some money on the side. I'll figure it out." He then shared his plan to apply for scholarships and do some freelancing work. Jake had developed a keen interest in YouTube over the years. He spent hours watching gaming videos, learning from other content creators, and dreaming about starting his own channel. "I've been working on a gaming channel," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "I think I can make something of it. Who knows? Maybe one day I can pay off all the loans." I chuckled at his enthusiasm, not fully understanding the world of YouTube. "That's a great idea, Jake," I said, patting his shoulder. "But remember, it's important to focus on your studies too. We'll figure things out together." As the months went by, Jake poured his heart into his studies and his YouTube channel. He worked tirelessly, balancing schoolwork with creating and editing videos. His channel started to gain some traction, but it was still far from being a reliable source of income. When the results of his scholarship applications came out, we all gathered around the computer, hearts pounding with anticipation. Jake had put in so much effort, and we were hopeful that his hard work would pay off. But as we scrolled through the list of recipients, Jake's name was nowhere to be found. The room fell silent. Jake stared at the screen, his face pale. "I didn't get any," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The disappointment was palpable, and I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. It was the first time since he had become healthy that I saw him this devastated. That night I found Jake sitting on his bed, staring blankly at the wall. I sat down beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "It's okay, Jake," I said softly. "We'll figure something out." "But Dad," he said, his voice cracking, "I wanted to help. I wanted to make things easier for you and Mom. Now what are we going to do?" I hugged him tightly, feeling his body tremble with emotion. "Jake, you don't have to carry this burden alone. You've already done so much, and we're incredibly proud of you. We'll find a way to manage your college fees. You're not alone in this." He sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "But how? We don't have the money." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "We'll figure it out, son. Maybe we can look into financial aid or student loans. I'll work extra hours if I have to. Your education is important, and we'll do whatever it takes to support you." Jake nodded slowly, the weight of the disappointment still heavy on his shoulders. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. "I'll keep trying. I won't give up." In the days that followed, Jake threw himself even more into his YouTube channel. He continued to apply for other scholarships and explore every possible avenue to fund his education. With his college dreams still alive but uncertain, Jake decided to apply for an education loan. The process was daunting, but he tackled it with the same determination that had seen him through so many challenges before. He also started working part-time at a local bookstore to help improve our financial situation. His efforts were tireless. Between classes, work, and his YouTube channel, Jake barely had a moment to rest. Despite the heavy load, he remained optimistic. He threw himself into his studies and continued to create content for his gaming channel. He'd spend late nights editing videos, learning about SEO, and interacting with his growing community. It was clear that this was more than just a hobby for him. It was a passion. One day, Jake received an email that changed everything. His YouTube channel had been accepted into the partner program. This meant he could finally monetize his videos. It felt like a huge step forward, a validation of all his hard work. He was ecstatic, and we celebrated this milestone together. A few weeks later, Jake received his first payment from YouTube. He eagerly opened the email detailing his earnings, only to find that it was a mere $10. I found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone with a disheartened expression. "It's not much," he said, trying to hide his disappointment. "I thought it would be more." I sat down next to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jake, this is just the beginning. Every big success starts small. The important thing is that you didn't give up, and you won't now. Keep going, and I know you'll make it." Jake nodded, a determined look returning to his eyes. "You're right, Dad. I won't give up." And he didn't. Jake continued to pour his heart and soul into his channel, posting videos consistently and engaging with his audience. His persistence began to pay off. His subscriber count grew steadily, and soon he started receiving sponsorship offers. The income from YouTube gradually increased, and within a year he was making a considerable sum of money. Over the next 3 years, Jake's channel exploded in popularity. He was able to pay off his education loan entirely, and not just that. He also started chipping away at the mountain of debt we had accumulated over the years due to his medical bills. Watching him work so hard and achieve his dreams filled me with an immense sense of pride. The day Jake finally cleared our debts was a day I'll never forget. He called a family meeting and handed me a piece of paper. It was a bank statement showing that every loan, every bit of debt, had been paid off. My wife and I were speechless, tears streaming down our faces as we hugged him. But Jake wasn't done yet. A few weeks after that monumental day, he surprised me with something even more heartwarming. One Saturday morning, he called me outside to the driveway. There, parked in front of our house, was a brand new car, the car I had dreamed of owning for so many years. "Dad," Jake said, holding out the keys, "this is for you. I know you gave up a lot for me, including this car. You deserve it." I was overwhelmed with emotion. Before Jake was born, I had saved up to buy my dream car. But when Jake's medical bills started piling up, I had to let go of that dream to ensure he got the care he needed. To see it now, sitting in our driveway, was surreal. I pulled Jake into a tight hug, my voice choked with tears. "You didn't have to do this, son. Your health and happiness are all I ever wanted." Jake hugged me back just as tightly. "I know, Dad, and that's why I wanted to do this. To thank you for everything, for never giving up on me, for always being there." Driving that car for the first time with Jake in the passenger seat was one of the most heartwarming moments of my life. It wasn't just about the car, it was about everything it represented. It was a symbol of Jake's resilience, his hard work, and his deep love for our family. As I looked over at Jake, now a young man with his future ahead of him, I realized that all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights and the financial worries had been worth it. We had come through the storm together and we were stronger for it. And most importantly, we had each other, and that was the greatest gift of all.